Welcome, and thank you for joining us today on your lunch break to talk about this important topic, unmasking abuse. Here with me today is Sonia. Say hello, Sonia. Uh,
Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us.
yes, we are delighted that you once again decided to take the time to join us in this really critical issue. Want to really quickly recap what we talked about last week, and a reminder that this is a three-part series. We're on part two. And last week, we talked about a critical topic, right? Which was unmasking myths. But first, I want to remind you why we're talking about this topic and why now. Number one, this is really important for Sonia and I. We're both survivors of domestic abuse, and we are on a mission to unmask abuse and bring awareness to this epidemic. Really, at the end of the day, we want to empower women, and we want to be an example that you too, if you are in an abusive relationship, can be a survivor, can get out and live the life that you deserve. Second, want to update you and remind you of some of the stats. This month, in case you weren't aware, it is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. However, Sonia and I both know that sadly, this is something that impacts women every day, and it's not a one time a month thing. The other thing is, 1 in 4 women experience domestic violence within their lifetime. And a critical stat that some of us may not be aware of is before the age of 18, 8.5 million girls experience domestic abuse, and 1.5 males, young boys, experience it. The other thing is that 3.5 million girls under the age of 18 first experience being stalked, while boys at the same time is 1.5 million. So it is an epidemic. It doesn't discriminate, and it definitely impacts either ourselves or somebody that we love. Now, while there is no exception for domestic violence, it disproportionately impacts and affects women of color. So we ask today that if you have any questions and you want to remain anonymous, feel free to text us, and you'll see the number on the screen. But let's get started. Part one, we talked about unmasking myths, and the first thing we talked about was the image of the abuser and the victim, and realizing that it could be anyone. The abuser could be a person you love, it could be an executive, it could be the person in the parking lot, it could be anybody, it could be a family member. It doesn't have a social class. The abuser could be anyone. So we wanted to remind you about that. The other thing is that the other myth was that the abuse is physical, and it's noticeable. The reality is 95% of calls for help received by the National Domestic Violence Hotline are due to psychological abuse. In fact, financial abuse is the most common form of abuse and the hardest to detect. And then one of the other myths we talked about is there are red flags. It's a myth. The reality is they are not always visibly present, and many times there are no red flags until you're already in the relationship or married, similar to what the story Sonia talked to us about in our first series. So let's get into it. You ready, Sonia? Ready for part two? You
Totally.
are always ready.
Let's do it.
Let's do this. So today we're going to be focusing on refocus your vision, and it's really changing the way that we view what is happening around us. So let's get started. Sonia, what does refocus your vision mean to you?
I think it's important to start looking at domestic abuse in a different way. Like you mentioned earlier, it's not just physical abuse. And because we think it's physical, we fail to notice the signs of abuse in our own relationships and the relationships of others we love. So that's why it's really important to be able to recognize the signs and talk about the little subtleties about them that make them so hard to detect. So I hope you guys are paying attention because refocusing your vision is about paying attention.
Yes, and that is exactly what we want to make sure that everybody understands is, but then how do you pay attention? How do you refocus? Many times these are things that have been happening in front of our faces for years, right? So we really want you to pay attention to see if you're being abused, right? And it's just become kind of the norm. So, how are you looking at things, and what are some of those things that you need to detect? Or it may be somebody that you love, and you're just like, that's the way we grew up. That's the way they are. They're not going to change. But we want you today to refocus your vision. So, and pay attention to those feelings. So, Sonia, how can people refocus their vision? What are some of the things that we should be doing?
I think we need to be aware of what the signs are of domestic, especially the subtleties of it. And the most important thing we need to know about domestic abuse is that it's about power and control. And it's when one partner wants to exert dominion over the other, and they have different ways of doing it. And the most common one is isolating the victim. I like to say that isolation is the power tool of the abuser, because once they remove us from our support networks and our friends or family, it's easier to keep us under their spell, and it's harder for us to get out of those relationships because we feel alone and we feel unsupported. So I really want to talk a little bit about that. Because what they typically do is first, the abusers are very loving. So you might think that, oh my goodness, my man is a catch. He's just so affectionate and he puts you on a pedestal and he makes you feel like you're on top of the world. And then things might start changing, right? And like Merary was just saying earlier, maybe there were some red flags, but sometimes there aren't any. And all of a sudden, bam, you come down that pedestal and it hurts. The higher you are, the harder you fall and the more it hurts. And they start isolating you from your family by preventing you from seeing them. Sometimes it's really clear cut, like they say, I don't want you to go with such and such person, I don't want you hanging out, I think your friend is a bad influence, or your family's taking too much time away from you. But there's more discreet ways of doing it besides those obvious ones I just said. For example, like when you go out with your friends, right? When you come home, you pay a high price for it. You know, the questions: what did you do? Did you see your boyfriend? Or asking you other questions about what was talked about. Did you get it? One thing that my ex-husband used to say to me all the time was, when he was listening into my conversations with my family, is, did you get orders from your mom? Did your mom tell you what to do? You know, what does the sergeant have to say? So they start making it so unpleasant for you to go out and come back and find yourself not knowing what's going to be waiting for you, or when you're having a conversation, having to put up with the nonsense that follows. So those are the little ways where sometimes you just give up on going out with a friend, or try to cut back on the conversation so that you don't have to deal with the aftermath. And they also try to control where you go, how you dress, and they can do that not by telling you wear this or wear that. I know it's normal. It's like some guys would like, when you wear something, oh, it's like, could you wear this dress for me? It looks so pretty on you. But it's more like when they criticize how you get dressed, right? And it could be subtle, like, oh, those pants make you look fat, or your legs look like baseball bats when you wear that skirt, or when you get your hair done. It's like, my ex-husband used to do that to me. He would call me names when I would get my hair done. So there's this, like, you can't win, you know. Anytime, no matter how you look or what you do, you're going to be wrong. And I like to say that it's how they make you feel that you really need to be paying attention to.
Yeah, no, I love those examples, and they're so critical because you're right. One of the things that I experienced is making you feel guilty or for either spending time on the phone with a family member, uh, staying at work late, but in a way that it's like, oh, you weren't working, you were flirting, or you were doing other things, right? Or even making you feel like when you have an accomplishment that it just wasn't good enough. I don't know why you're making a big deal, but it's about making you feel less of. It's really about attacking that confidence, because remember, when they attack your confidence, you're more than likely to be either more submissive or thinking that you deserve it, right?
Yes.
One of the other things that I know you mentioned in our previous was even destroying things that are of value to you. That could be relationship with loved ones, or it could be materialistic things. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, that's right. And one of the ways they tend to intimidate you, and this is another dynamic of partner abuse, is intimidating you, even if they don't assault you physically. It's that intimidation that they make you afraid of being yourself. Like Merary, you were just saying about your accomplishments, being yourself, expressing yourself, becoming your best self. And that's one of their tactics. And pay attention, because if they go about destroying property to intimidate you, they start breaking things, especially things that are close to you physically or close to you emotionally, then you know it is abuse. It's not like, pay attention, because it's not like they go around destroying their own property, it's destroying things that belong to you or are important to you. And that's a telltale sign. So pay attention.
Yeah. The other piece that we talked about is how do they make you feel when it comes to your financials, right? Because we just heard that one of the insights is that 95% of the calls, right, they may not be physical, they could be psychological. So we talked about how they make you feel, but financial is one of the hardest ones to detect, right? Is it
Yes.
that they are controlling your finances and making it feel that anything that you buy for yourself is an issue, or they could be trying to control your finances. I mean, this used to happen to me by threatening to show up in my job, right? Because they could see that I was financially stable and was able to probably walk away and disappear if I really wanted to financially. But this was a way to control me by number one, intimidating me because I didn't want to lose my career. And number two, as a way to, hey, I gotta have control. I gotta have control because this is a way that she could do something different.
That's right. Financial abuse is very powerful. And the purpose is to keep you from being self-sufficient, from being independent, so that you are stuck with the abuser. You depend on this person for it to live. And they can do it in a number of different ways, because like you said, you had a good job. So they show up at your job or keep calling constantly to make you lose your job, or they show up to create disturbances and make embarrassing scenes in front of all your coworkers. So it's just, it makes it very difficult for you to be yourself. They can prevent you from trying to get an education, discouraging you from getting a good job, discouraging you from going to school, from switching careers. They could be destroying your credit. They can be emptying out your bank account. I know I have a friend whose partner, he pretended he wanted to marry her. They were living together. He had access to her ATM cards. He emptied out her bank account. He sold her jewelry, and she had absolutely nothing. And she had nowhere to go. And she was an immigrant. So she was even more terrified of, what can I do? Because she didn't have any family in the United States. So these are the different things that they can do that paralyze you from getting help.
Yeah, no, and I think we're going into a really important topic that you and I were discussing earlier this week, and that is one of the first things that they try to do is to isolate you from people that you love, from friends, family, really isolate you from the world so that you keep things to yourself and you don't tell others. Because that's, obviously that's a sign of them losing control. So, one of the things that we wanted to talk about is how, well, two things. Number one, do not isolate yourself if you can, right? One of the things is continue to have those conversations, somebody that you trust. But then the other question was, if someone, how can I help someone that I think may be going through this, through domestic violence? And because I know we'll be talking more about it next week, for how you can help yourself personally. But let's talk a little bit more about why is it so critical to stay in connection with other people's. And I know that was something that you and I talked about, Sonia, if you don't mind sharing how you were kind of isolated from everyone.
Yeah, so for me it was really difficult. I am from Puerto Rico. My family lives in Puerto Rico, so I didn't really have anyone nearby who could lend me a hand. So I try to keep some things to myself so my family wouldn't know what I was going through and wouldn't worry about me. And that actually gave him more power and more control over me because he knew I had nowhere to go. And friends, it should not just be family who are looking out for you. You should be looking out for your friends as well, and you should be, like I said before, paying attention. That's what it's all about. I remember when I first got married, and things started within 24 hours of the wedding, that somebody I worked with, and I wasn't particularly friendly with this person. We didn't socialize or anything like that, but she noticed, you don't laugh anymore. You don't smile anymore. I used to be very outgoing and very friendly and very warm. And then all of a sudden, I just had that dark cloud over me, and it was noticeable. So if you think someone might be experiencing abuse, one of the things you need to be on the lookout for is any changes in personality or behavior, because that's where you start noticing it. If the person is starting to pull away from you, doesn't contact you as much, um, you don't get together. When you are together, they might seem nervous around the partner. These are things that you need to be paying attention to. And instead of taking things personally and thinking it's about you, think that it might be about the other person. This person might be hurting and might need your support.
Yes, no, and that's important because the way that it happened to me was similar, Sonia, right? Like I didn't want to tell my family, right? Because I was then afraid of what would happen if there was
Hmm.
a connection or a face off, right? You know, I have brothers, so I was afraid of what would
Oof.
happen. I have parents. And the other thing is, I was afraid if I said anything at work that it may impact my job. But
Yeah.
in the other thing is, I was embarrassed, right? I felt it was my fault. And I think this is why it's so critical for, if you are a friend and you think you know someone that may be going through abuse, to pay attention to those signs, because many times we don't see them. I mean, that's another myth, right? That there are signs that you see them. No, I'm an educated woman. I'm an executive. I'm a professional, and I was manipulated into thinking that it was my fault. I was manipulating into thinking that I wasn't good enough, that nobody could help me because he was going to hurt or impact in some way those who I loved. So it was so important to me. I always have one friend, and she's still my friend to this day, who really spent the time with me and always checked in on me. Hey, are you okay? Hey, are you okay? And I think the really what how she helped me, because she couldn't really do anything else, was she helped me with was just being there, just me knowing that I can call somebody, that I had if it really came down to it. But those are the things that I'm really grateful for, because she didn't judge me. Everybody else, they just felt like, oh, she's just doing her thing. She doesn't want to associate with anybody. She just thinks she's too good. People start putting a million things. Little did they realize that I was literally depressed, dying inside, and I needed help. And that was my way of reaching out, which is, it's normal for a lot of women, because we don't know what to say or do. It's not like we were born and said, "Hey, I have experience in this area. Um, I'll handle it this way," right? Nobody wakes up one day and says, "I am going to be a victim of abuse today." No, that's not the way it works. So it is serious, and we need to pay attention to those close friends and not judge them, even when they tell you not judge them.
Yeah, that's really important because we have that tendency to say, just leave the SOB. You got to get. There's a friend who's a therapist, and she would tell her patients, you gotta get rid of that wretched man. No, if you tell your friend, if you give them ultimatums, if you disparage the partner, if you tell them what to do, you're stealing their autonomy, and they're going to be on the defensive. They're going to start either defending their partners, getting closer to the partner, trying to justify their behaviors, and ultimately cut you out or hide things from you. And that's the last thing you want.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And when you feel that way, you're like, they don't understand me, right? So why should I
Yes.
share anything with them? And and that's important. I think the other reason why, when I look at myself, and the reason I felt that way is because you know, you're like, hey, I had some experiences growing up, right? Or I saw some things growing up. This is, even though you know in your gut that it's wrong, it's like, oh, but that's kind of how it is. So there could be a million reasons. The reality is, like I mentioned before, you do not deserve, nobody deserves to be
Nobody.
abused. Nobody. You could have been the worst person in your lifetime. You still do not deserve to be abused, right? That is not a right that
Yeah.
anybody has. So want to make sure that you're aware there's nothing you could have done uh, in being able to empower yourself is something that we're going to talk about next time. So we hope that you can continue to join us because this is critical. And then the other thing that we want to mention is Sonia will provide us and she'll talk to us a little bit more about the book. Sonia, if you want to just quickly mention it before we go to the next.
Sure. My book, Stop the Hurt, you can see it on the screen, will be available on Amazon, and I have a special offer so that you can have your free copy if you stay with us till next week. So, more details to come on the next session.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. We want to be able for you to empower yourself if you're one that is going through abuse, but we also want to make sure that you have some tools at hand. And that is what Sonia will provide next week when we meet again for our lunchtime to really talk about how you can empower yourself. Now, we did get a question, Sonia, so I wanted to make sure that we get to it. And I
Great.
apologize, I won't get to all of them, but the the one that I want to get to, because this one is one that I could probably talk about as well, and I'm sure you can too, is things things got better, but then he goes again and commits the abuse, and he accuses me and says that the reason why these things are happening is because I don't want to have children.
Hmm. I
And
can
then the
relate to this
question
one.
that they have is, I'm considering having children. Is this the right thing to do or not? Now, while we can't make your decisions, I'm going to send it over to Sonia since she's the expert attorney in these areas and she's just been through a lot so of examples. Go ahead, Sonia.
Well, actually, that happened to me. I got married, and I thought I wanted to have kids, and then I realized that the person I was with was abusive. And the last thing I wanted to do is to bring a child into this world because I suspected, I was very young, I didn't know any better, but my intuition told me that if he does this to you, he's either going to do it to you in front of the children or to the children. And I don't think any child should have to live with a situation like that. So I decided not to have kids. I refused to have children. And he kept on trying to talk me into it and saying that, things would be so different if we had children. If your partner is abusive, get help. I recommend that under any abusive circumstance. But really, having children is exposing you and your children to harm. And especially because by having children, that really empowers them because now you have a child, now you have a very strong reason to stay together. So be very cautious and get help right away. How about you, Merari? What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I can tell you that every time, what I would say is, before I tell my my little side of the story, follow your instincts. You are smarter than you know. This person may have convinced you that you're not, but you are. When these things would happen, the abuse would happen with my ex, he would be like, "We're getting married. We need to." I wasn't married to him, so I probably should have walked out sooner. But
Mm,
he would automatically, it's like, let's get married. And I think he would say that because he was like, she's gonna realize it. He knew I was smart. He was just trying to control me. And for us, it was about getting married or wanting to have kids. And this is the probably the most difficult part, which I couldn't answer myself till this day, is I knew I did not want to marry this man. But for some reason, I couldn't. He had basically my self esteem put it so low that
mm,
convinced me that I couldn't find anybody better. And,
that's right.
but inside my gut and my heart, I was like, I am not going to marry him because he's not the one. And I knew it, but yet my self confidence was so low. So that's why, to me, it's so important what you're saying, because you know, you were like, no, I'm not having kids. I know why this is. So you
Mm.
followed that, even though we were still in this situation. There was still some breath, some hope inside of you, and I would say follow that. If it feels wrong, more than likely it is, and I am so thankful that I didn't. Now there are women and friends that I know who've had children with abusive men, both psychological and physical. And, what advice can you give to these women that have had children because they were already in those relationships and he may have become abusive later, or they had children. They didn't know. And now they feel that if they walk away, the person may hurt their children or it may be worse. What are your thoughts on that? Because it's those are real. I mean, we hear about some of those stories, and I know personally some people who have experienced that.
My answer is the same: get help right away because you deserve better and your children deserve better. You should not have to tolerate those behaviors, and you need to have someone give you the support and the strength that you need to get yourself back on your feet. You do not have to depend on this person. Like you said, you're smart, follow your intuition and allow yourself and your children to be happy and have lives free of abuse. Nobody has the right to abuse you. Nobody has the right to harm you. And no matter what you do or your differences, there are better ways of handling them than abusing you. So get help and get out
Absolutely. And one
on
of the
your
things,
terms. Yes.
yeah, no, absolutely, under your terms. Absolutely. One of the things that we have learned is that marriage is, if the signs were there, now we know there are cases where the signs are not, like in your case, Sonia. But if the
Mm-hmm.
signs are there, marriage is not going to fix it. Having children is not going to fix it. And I am so thankful till this day that I stood my ground.
Good
But
girl.
get help, and we have the domestic violence hotline on here for you. Talk to them. Have a plan. We'll talk a little bit more about that next week, so I don't want to get into reclaiming your power, but know that we will focus our next 30 minutes next week on focus on reclaiming your power. So join us, please. You don't want to miss this last part of the series. Join us next week on the 27th, where we will be talking about reclaiming your power. Our last part, where we will also share some of the tools on where you can get the tools that you need to reclaim your power. We thank you for joining us. If you have any questions, we please go ahead and text that number. We'll make sure to cover them, either answer them through the series or cover them as a specific question during the next time we meet on the 27th. Sonia, any last parting words?
I just wanted to thank everyone for joining us. And for those who missed the first session, it is available on YouTube. So you can follow the entire series.
Yes. Follow us. And we ask one thing: if you are currently going through abuse, get some help, speak to somebody that you trust. And whatever you do, know that you do deserve to live a joyful life. And we're here next week to talk about how you can reclaim your power. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.